So this lesson, we're going to be looking at how we can use the different events, creating a bunch of different elements that are nested, and also showing how they are able to interact. So the difference between the mouse enter, mouse over, as well as mouse leave and mouse out, how you can track those different events and track the event information, setting up the different options on the elements and the different click options that are available, and removing the event listener from the elements on the page. We have two buttons on the page, and we're going to add event listeners to the buttons. So selecting both buttons, we're going to create and make the selection using the query selector all, selecting both page elements that have a tag of button, and then we'll use the index value for the buttons in order to select each one. So we're adding an event listener to the first button. So adding event listener, and the event that we're listening for is going to be a click. And when it gets clicked, it's going to just update the output content, and we'll create a function in order to manage that. And then the second button as well, when it gets clicked, we'll select and update the output content. So let's create the function and create some output content, and we can track the event object. And in this case, I want to select the other page element, and this is just going to be the main content area. So using the document and query selector, select the element with a class of output. Then we can use that in order to output some content into it. So within the main, select the text content of main, and I'll update that to using the event type and selecting the element that we want to output. We'll also create a variable that can increase, set up a counter variable that will increase, and then we'll output the value of counter so that this will be changing every time that it gets clicked. So go ahead and we'll try it out. And now let's update, and we're going to add the event listener from the element so that we can only click each button once. So select the element, and then this is going to be the e-target that made the selection. And then using the remove event listener, we're going to be removing out the click event and then the function that was setting that. So now we should only be able to click each button once, and this is how you can use the remove event listener in order to remove an event from the element object. And besides click, there's a whole number of different elements that can be added and set, so different types of events. So let's look at and use the mouse down event. So create another function called show1. So take the event content and output the result within the main text content. We're going to get the event type, and as well we can get the counter. So we don't necessarily need to update the counter. So whenever we've got mouse down on the first element, we track the mouse down and we get the counter value there. You can also do an increment, so that's going to be constantly changing. So the mouse down will still work, as this is a separate event that's been added to the page element. So even though on the click we removed the click, the mouse down is still tracking. There's also a mouse up event, and there's a number of different events that can be added. So we've got the mouse down, and then when it gets released, that's going to show the mouse up. So that's where we're seeing just the mouse up, because here we've removed out the click event. And you can remove out these different event types as well. Let's add a few other mouse events. So these are some commonly used ones where we've got the mouse enter. So whenever we enter on top of the element, that fires off the mouse enter. There's also the mouse leave. So this will get invoked whenever you leave from being on top of the mouse. There's also a mouse over and a mouse out. So these are very similar, and these events occur when the mouse is moved onto the element or within the children of the element. So let's create a second main container, and this is where we can use the document create element, and then creating another div that we're going to nest some additional elements into and add this into the document body, and we'll prepend it. So that's the main one element. And let's create a loop where we'll create a bunch of other additional elements and we'll nest them inside. So starting at 0, and set the value of I while I is less than 5, and then we'll increment I by 1, And here we're going to be adding in additional child elements into the parent. So it's going to be all going into main1. So selecting the element using the document and create element. So creating a bunch of new divs that are going to be sitting within the parent. Within these elements, I'm going to set the width property value. So using the width style value of the element, and element style to display, so we can stack them right next to each other. And within the element style, so that you can distinguish between the elements. So one pick solid black border, and then add them into main1. Also add in some text content for the element. So set the text content, and we'll use the index value to distinguish them. So that sets up the different elements, and they are all still nested within the parent. So we're going to add in some mouse events into them. So setting up for the element, let's add an event listener. And the event that we're listening for is going to be a mouse enter event. And whenever the mouse enter runs, then we'll update the elements and select the element style color, go red. So whenever we enter, we see that those are changing. They're going red. And we'll set that back to black on the mouse leave. And let's take a look at what the difference between the mouse out and the mouse over. So we've got the mouse enter, mouse leave. There's also a mouse over event and a mouse out event. And here we'll set the element text content. So we see the updates there as we're going over. So the difference between the two is that the mouse out does not bubble. And that's why when we leave and we leave the content, we see that we've got the word leave instead of out, because there's no bubbling for the out and for the over. So typically you would either use the mouse enter, mouse leave, or the mouse over, mouse out. So there's a touch start, touch end for touch screens. So those events can also be tracked on various page elements. And coming up, we're going to take a look at some additional keyboard events that we can track using the event listener.